Hey, this is Mechiel and welcome to my Fearless Innovator podcast. Thank you for joining me today. My hope is to inspire, educate, and entertain you. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Fearless Innovator podcast. My name is Mechiel and I'm your host. This week, I want to share with you where the name Fearless Innovator came from. And I want to break it into two pieces, fearless and innovator. I grew up with a father that never showed me fear. And when I say never, I mean never. It wasn't until I researched my book that I realized that this is why I live my life the way I do today. It's all because he never showed me fear. And throughout my life, I have lived a fearless life. I've done a lot of things that most people won't do. But I never knew that that was unique until I researched the book, and then being around other people, they always say, "Why did you do that?" I'm like, "I don't know. I just felt like doing it." But it's because I grew up with a dad that was fearless. So I want to give you some examples of fearless. My dad was actually a farmer, a dirt farmer, but he also flew a plane. He was a pilot. I remember when he went to school to get his license. And then he got a plane, and it was a small plane. I think it was a 4-seater. But here's an example. On Sundays, we had the opportunity to go to what they called flight breakfasts. And it was usually in a neighboring town. The one that I recall the most was we went to Audubon, which was just like 20 miles from our house. We would go up in the plane, and when you arrived in a plane, you got to eat your breakfast for free. But if you walked in, you had to pay. So we would go and eat our breakfast, which consisted of pancakes. They usually called it a pancake breakfast. So you'd have bacon, sausage, and pancakes. And then you'd mingle with everybody, and then you'd fly home. Well, on the way home, Dad would do these maneuvers in the sky. He would go clear. He would tip the right wing clear to the right and make really hard right angles. He'd flip it back over and go clear to the left. He would raise the propeller up. And when you do that, it kills the engine. And now the engine's not moving. And the kids in the back were scared to death. The three of us girls sat in the back and we were scared to death. And the only way to start the plane, it's not like there's a key for it. You actually have to dip the nose back down in order to allow that propeller to start up again. And that part alone would scare the living daylights out of us. And then he would get up in the sky and he'd kill the engine on purpose. And we never really understood why he was doing it, ever. We just thought, because he's kind of he's got a need for speed, right? So we were thinking he's just doing that. And it would make my mom sicker than a dog. She hated it. She didn't even want to go anymore with us. I did, because I was thinking this is fun. But it wasn't until later I realized that the reason he was doing it, it's actually criteria he has to meet on a yearly basis to maintain his pilot's license. As kids, we didn't know that. But we also knew he wasn't trying to kill us, and we trusted him, right? So that's one thing that he used to do. Another thing was, and here's something else. His runway was made out of our field. So in other words, at one end, if you came in too low, you're going to get electrocuted. And if you didn't slow down fast enough on the other end because the runway was too short, you're going to go in a river. So it's like Dad always set these parameters around himself to make things harder on himself, to be better, right? So that's one thing. Then at age 9, I remember dreaming that I wanted a horse. I wanted to wake up one day at Christmas time and find a horse in the barn. Well, that's not what I got. I got a motorcycle at age 9. Now, it wasn't a big motorcycle. It was more of a dirt bike than anything. It was a little Honda XL75. And there was motive behind this. It wasn't just for pure pleasure, although in later years, I do use it for pure pleasure. The motive was now I had the means to go back 1.5 miles and check on the cows and check the fencing and do anything that Dad needed me to do. So there was a motive behind that. But the other thing was in the late 70s, early 80s, we would take vacations on motorcycles. So my dad would be on one bike, his GL 1000, and my mom would be on her Honda 500. And the three of us girls, now think about it, there's three of us. Where are three kids going to sit on two motorcycles? Well, dad had a solution. He went down to the sheriff and he asked a lot of questions. And one of the questions he asked was, if I put foot pegs underneath the gas tank and I strap a pillow to the gas tank, am I legal? And the sheriff says, as long as you've got that child has foot pegs, you're good. So he put foot pegs underneath his gas tank, strapped a pillow, and Melissa sat there. My other sister sat behind dad, and I sat behind my mom. Well, I don't know if y'all are old enough to remember, but back in the 70s, motorcycles weren't cool. I like to think of it as the Barbara Mandrell song, When Country Wasn't Cool. Well, motorcycles weren't cool. The only people riding motorcycles back then were the Hells Angels and the Outlaws. And you didn't want to be caught up wrapped in those guys, right? So, interestingly enough, when we're out on the highway, people didn't take to us so much. We got flipped off. People were cutting us off, pointing at us, laughing at us. But what we did is we made it a game. We started pointing at little kids in the windows and making little gestures and waving to them to let them know that we were actually a pretty good family and you know, we weren't crazy. So that's another thing that we did. And at age 16, I got my driver's license and I've been riding a motorcycle ever since. And there's other examples of my dad being fearless, but I think you get the gist of it. Actually, when he finally sold the airplane, he went and bought an ultralight. Well, an ultralight is a one-man job with a set of wings, really. They're cloth wings. One day, I was actually in Philadelphia at this time when this happened, but I got a phone call from my dad and he said, Shal, I want to tell you something. And I said, okay. Gosh, I teared up. And he said, I want to tell you something. And I said, what? And he said, well, I was up flying today and I fell out of the sky. I said, what? He said, I don't know what happened, Shal, but the pressure in the sky just dropped and I fell from like the tops of the trees. And I was like, okay, well, are you okay? And he said, yeah, I'm fine. I just got a bump on my head. I said, all right. Well, years later, when I was home, he told me he was never going to fly again. Well, I came home one day and he was in the garage and he was working on the wings. And I said, Dad? And he said, yeah. I said, I know what that is. And he goes, I know you do. I said, what are you doing with it? He said, I'm just putting it back together. And he did finish it. So I think you get the gist of the fearless part with my father. Now, the innovator part, this part's a little more interesting. So I grew up with two male figures in my life, my dad and my grandpa. Both of them were engineering brains. They could do anything with their hands. And they were masters at everything. When I mean, like when I'm in my rental business today, I have to hire a plumber, I have to hire an electrician, I have to hire the guy that does the floor work. Well, nope. My dad could do all of it. He was an electrician. He was a plumber. He could tear apart trucks and trailers, motorcycles. He built a car from the ground up, from the frame up. So my dad could do anything. And he learned that, from his father because grandpa grew up during the Depression. So grandpa only had a sixth grade education. And he was pulled out of school in sixth grade to go work on the farm because they needed the kids back then to work on the farm. And my grandfather's first invention was, I'm probably not going to get the piece of machinery right, but it was a horse drawn, I think it was a harrow, that he built a seat and put wheels on it. And he invented that when he was 16 years old out of necessity. And so that's how his brain worked. So years later in life, my grandfather had over 30 different inventions and most of them were patented. But the one that I am most proud of and thankful for is my job every morning. We had 100 head of cattle. And my job every morning was to go feed them at 5 o'clock in the morning and then again after school. And I'd have to go down and pitch hay into them and make sure that, they were fed. Well, in the 80s, Grandpa, his brain worked a little different than most, I think. He would go to bed at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and he would wake up early, and he would go right to the shop and go right to work. Well, in these particular years, Grandpa would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he had a dream. And the dream was he was going to make something that was going to make his life a lot easier. And he started crafting this piece of machinery out in the shop. Well, what it ultimately led to be was he invented the round hay baler. Now, most of you might not know what that is, but if you go around driving anywhere today in the United States, I don't care if you're on an interstate or a back road, you're going to see these great big round hay bales. And that's what my grandfather invented. It's called the rotary baler, if you want to look it up. And I was thankful because now I didn't have to do chores anymore, because my dad would take the tractor, stick the bale with the little stick thing, and go put it in this round hay baler thing, and then the cows would eat for themselves. So I didn't have to do chores anymore. So I was thankful. So I think you can get the gist of where the innovator came from. And then when I was doing my research for my book, everybody kind of needs a little title, of who you are and kind of what you represent. And so I realized that, I'm in real estate now. I invest in real estate. So I was like, how do I get this fearless, how do I get a name? So I went back to my roots and I figured out the fearless was easy because I live a fearless life, just like my father. And so that was easy. And then I'm like, well, what's a word that can describe me? And I looked back and I realized that my dad and my grandpa were both innovators. And I'm technically an innovator also. I was in the technical field for 25 years in IT. And so I said, you know what? And now I'm in real estate. I'm like, you know what? It just fits. Fearless Innovator is, how I'm going to define myself. So that's where it came from. I hope you enjoyed the story or stories. But again, my end goal is to inspire you, educate you, and entertain you with stories about my journey and how I became an entrepreneur in real estate. So in the next couple of stories, I'm going to lead you down some other paths to help you understand a little bit more about myself. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at fearlessinnovator.com/contact. And if you'd like a free copy of my book, you can go to fearlessinnovator.com/free book. The name of my book is called Why My Job Quit Me, Jumpstart Your Firing. Have a good day. Thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the show. If I can help you invest in your future, reach out to me at fearlessinnovator.com. Catch me later.